Welcome back up to the Vinyl Attic. We are counting through the 100 albums that should be in your collection. The 100 albums that I think, outside of the obvious ones, Dark Side of the Moon, to name but a few, are special, have something unique sonically or musically, at least according to me. Dr. Randall Blazak. And this album, I've been waiting to talk about it, but I've been waiting to talk about it in vain. And then let me tell you why. We're going to talk about Fleetwood Mac's sixth album, Bare Trees, that comes out in March of 1972. And the reason we've been waiting in vain is this is my favorite winter album. Look at that album cover, a photography by John McVie, the bass player. I love pulling this album out in the winter time. I really feel like it captures that winter vibe, but we haven't really had winter in Portland this year. The rest of the country has had it hardcore, but we have had zero snow. We've had very little rain. It's been very strange. Climate change has impacted Portland in ways that we will regret this summer when there's no snow on the mountain and melt down into the rivers. But this album is that sense of the grayness. And you know, if you've been watching this channel, I love an album that captures a vibe. Like an entire album captures a vibe. You might have been watching way back when I did a discussion of the Taylor Swift album Midnights and how that really captures the idea of, you know, getting home after being at the club and listening to music on lo-fi. And I love albums that sort of capture a feel. And this is a great one. This is the last Fleetwood Mac album with Danny Kirwan, who joined in 1969. In fact, Kirwan writes half the songs on this album, but this is really the peak of the Bob Welch years. Bob Welch's songs on here are also really great, and Christine McVie, her songs are just kind of, you know, some of her best. I mean, all her stuff is best. I mean, now that she's gone, we really remember her well. But "Spare Me a Little of Your Love" from this album was in the Fleetwood Mac stage show, their live shows, way into the Rumors years. It really captures this vibe. And one of the reasons I love this album is when our daughter was 3, she moved from sleeping in the crib to sleeping on the couch in her little nursery, and I would sleep on the floor next to her while she fell asleep, and we listened to this CD every night. So I'm hoping that this album is baked into her brain somewhere. The songs on here are really evocative. There is a really great instrumental on here, "Sunny Side of Heaven," that was later played in the Lindsey Buckingham Fleetwood Mac era years as an instrumental. And probably the best known song on here is "Sentimental Lady," the Bob Welch song, who after he leaves the band, he re-records it on a solo record with the help of some of the members of Fleetwood Mac, and it becomes a huge hit. It's such a great song. In fact, there's a Family Guy episode dedicated to Bob Welch and "Sentimental Lady," showing you that it is sort of one of the core yacht rock songs of the 1970s. This record didn't do super well. Made it up to about 70 on the charts. 70 on the charts. And was kind of a turning point for the band. Danny Kirwan, who was taking on a lot of the songwriting work for this record, and his songs in here are so great, and his guitar playing is great, and his voice is great, but he was a raging alcoholic, and according to the stories, he was not eating, he was just living on beer. And they had a show as they were touring for this record where he and Bob Welch got into a fight over the tuning, that he felt Bob Welch was not in tune, and so before they went on the show, he smashed his head against the wall, then he smashed his Gibson Les Paul against the wall, walked away from the band. They had to go on stage and play without him, including all his songs, and he watched from the mixing board, and then they shortly fired him after that. He was replaced by a guy named Bob Weston for a bit, and then Buckingham Nicks joins in 1975, and it becomes the Fleetwood Mac that everybody knows. And it's interesting, when the 75 album comes out with Rhiannon, this album goes into the charts because people were like, who's this Fleetwood Mac band? And they went back, and this was the album that they discovered because it is just so evocative. That word is used too much, but it so captures this cover. And in fact, it ends in not a song, but a poem from a lady down the street, Mrs. Scarrett. It's in a poem about trees in the wintertime. And so it's kind of a perfect little, not a concept album, but a perfect attempt to capture that feeling of the doldrums of winter. The other great story about, it's not a great story, but it's kind of tragic. I mean, Kirwan is tragic. I mean, he tries to put out some albums in the 70s, does some solo work, and the records are pretty good, but they never sell. And then in the 80s, he becomes a homeless alcoholic. He becomes a homeless alcoholic in the streets of London and never records again. Survives until 2018, where he dies of pneumonia. But the other kind of tragic story of this album is, also tragic is that when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted Fleetwood Mac, they couldn't find Kirwan to show up. Danny was missing, so he didn't show up for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. But the other sad story here is Bob Welch, and Bob Welch's music on here. The Bob Welch contribution to Fleetwood Mac is amazing. I've made mixes and compilations and playlists of just Bob Welch's Fleetwood Mac songs that are also great. And then he leaves, and he has a kind of marginally successful solo career for a bit, and then he kind of falls off because he can't keep up with the Fleetwood Mac fame that he had, and then has a series of health problems, and in 2012 had to have back surgery because he had a serious back problem, and it was not successful, and they told him that he would be kind of disabled for the rest of his life, and shortly after that he shot himself in his Nashville home. Tragic ending to a really great artist. So there's all kinds of stuff woven into this record. I mean, sometimes it's seen as the Fleetwood Mac in transition from the Peter Green years to the Stevie Nicks years, like this sort of middle Bob Welch period. But it is an album that makes you feel like you're in a bunch of bare trees, that it's the middle of winter and you look out the window and all you see is black and gray and maybe a little bit of white. It really has that feel, and I will always love this album so much. I just think people should give it a good listen if you haven't listened to it. Bare Trees, 1972. The next album that comes out, Penguin, in March 1973, does a lot better. It really sort of starts pushing Christine McVie to the front, and there is more focus on the core band with Bob Welch and Christine McVie really doing all the vocals, and now that Danny Kirwan's out of the picture. That's a great record too. Penguin is sort of an iconic one. And then they had one more, and then the famous Fleetwood Mac that we all know and love became a thing. So I wanted to give this album a little bit of love. So good. This nice matte cover. I mean, look how wintry that is. Doesn't that make you feel like you should roll up in a blanket? And that's how it sounds. It has that sound. It's almost like something like the ambient music that, George Winston would be doing. It really creates the feeling of winter. All right. Love that. So next time we've got a great record. This is another record that people sort of discovered after the fact, which is Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. Dennis Wilson's great solo album that has sort of gained new light in wake of the environmental movement, and how in the 1970s Dennis Wilson was kind of ahead of his time in thinking about how to sing about the nature of the climate crisis we're in. So we're going to talk about Dennis Wilson next time, but this album matters. This Fleetwood Mac is Fleetwood Mac, right? We've already talked about Tusk at the beginning of this charade that we're doing, but this album needed to be discussed. It matters. Bob Welch matters. Danny Kirwan matters. Bare Trees definitely matter. You matter. So let's talk about it.